Hello, beautiful divine souls. Welcome back to Goddess Unleashed or Goddess of Rebirth, the podcast where we dive deep into health, wellness, and personal growth. I'm Monica, your host today, and we are going to explore a topic that touches the lives of so many women and girls around the world. There are sometimes questions that are not answered, and there are misconceptions around the topic of hormonal changes and imbalances in teenage girls transition into puberty. So we're going to tackle that. We have a very special guest today. I'm honored to have Dr. Sohère Roked, a renowned hormone specialist and author, here to shed some light on this very crucial topic for young women around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Sohère Roked. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start by talking a little bit about what is actually happening in our body as we are transitioning into puberty. What are those changes? What is the transitioning actually in medical terms, if you want to help us understand better?
Sure. So I guess in puberty, I'd almost describe it like your hormones are waking up. The signals from the brain for women are going to the ovaries, and the ovaries start becoming active. And the three main hormones we produce from our ovaries are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And these vary throughout a month, and this causes a monthly cycle for us women. So the varying levels of the estrogen and progesterone mainly, and this is all to do with our fertility, really. So puberty starts happening. First of all, before the period, you can often have other signs of puberty. So maybe getting hairs under the arms or in the vagina area. You could start maybe noticing some different body odor. The breasts start developing a little bit. And then normally after that, that's a sign your hormones are starting to kick in. And then normally at some point after that, you start experiencing the period. And this biologically is all about fertility, really, whether you want to have a baby or not. So your estrogen levels rise, and an egg from the ovaries is released down the fallopian tubes. And then the progesterone rises to thicken the lining of your womb, so that if the egg becomes fertilized, it can implant and you can go on to have a pregnancy. But if those things don't happen, the hormone levels drop, and then you bleed. You shed that lining of the womb, and that's the period, because you're not pregnant. So there's a biological reason behind this. We know, a very long time ago, medieval times, people were having children very, very young. It was a very different time, because as soon as you have your period, technically you could be having a baby. Obviously, that's not what we do in society today, but it's your body telling you, it's that whole thing of you've become a woman, you can carry a child. So that is the biological basis of what's going on around your period.
We hear about hormones everywhere, social media and the internet. But why is that hormones play such a big role in this transition? Like, we're becoming young adults, and how is it impacting the lifestyle of a child, a teenager, a young adult?
I'd say it's a marking of time. It's a rite of passage. We're talking mainly about women today, but men have a similar thing with their puberty, where they produce a lot more testosterone, and they have, a similar transition. They don't have the breasts and things like that, but, they'd have the hair growth. They would have, facial hair. The voice changes in boys as they go into men, where the voice deepens because of the testosterone levels rising. So this is an important part of us moving from being a child into being a teenager, really. Because for most people, this happens when you're a teenager. Of course, there are some cases where, women or boys and girls, they go through their puberty a little bit earlier, maybe around 10 or 11, but generally it's thought to be a teenage thing. And yeah, I guess it marks a change in your life in the same way that when the woman is much older, maybe around the 50s, she often goes through the menopause. And that's another marker in terms of her biology and what's happening biologically in the body.
Is it recommended to test our hormone level and see like we need to balance certain things, or especially for teenagers that are in the transition phase? I imagine, and probably this is a misconception, I'm not so sure, but the levels might be fluctuating from like really high to really low. And so is it recommended to test levels, or what's your
No,
opinion?
no, it's not recommended to test levels unless there was a problem that you were aware of. And then you might consult the doctor. Maybe say if you are maybe 15, 16, you're not experiencing your periods, then you might go and see someone for that. But generally, it's not recommended because, as you said, there's a lot of fluctuation at that time. So sometimes a girl can have a period and then maybe won't have another one for a few months. Maybe there'll be a few close together while the body is adjusting to the hormonal changes, and then it might stop for a little while. So really it's about going based on your symptoms and how you're feeling rather than recommending sort of blanket testing for everyone at that stage.
Wise advice. Thank you. Um, so we're talking about physical changes. What about the emotional and the mental impact? Is it really hormones that are affecting our emotional moods?
Yeah, definitely. You and I are both women. I'm sure we can relate as people older that definitely does have an impact on the way you feel. It can be your emotions, your energy, your mood. I think what's really great, especially say where I am in the UK, when I was a teenager, there wasn't that much information around your periods and what you should do about it. It's just like, oh, this is just part of being a woman and deal with it. When I was young, I used to have really extreme period pains where I'd sometimes have to be in bed because they were so severe. And obviously, as a teenager, maybe my pain threshold wasn't as good as it is now as a slightly older person now. So it can be quite distressing for you as a teenager having this severe pain, or even just if you're having a lot of heavy bleeding, that can be very difficult. And having to deal with that at school, around exams and things like that. All these things do have an effect. So it's, I hope that this conversation is helping to open up a dialogue either between, mothers and daughters, or between, girls and an older a woman that they can trust, be that an auntie or a family friend or a teacher, just to be aware that these are lots of changes. And obviously, as you go into your 20s and 30s and 40s, you can deal with these things a lot better. But it can be quite a lot to deal with emotionally at that age as well.
Probably it's also good to make space for our emotions. Like sometimes we tend to be, like I don't want to have all of these roller coasters, but sometimes it's just I need to be present and experience, let it pass through and continue your life. And I know that it might be frustrating sometimes, but it's part of an experience. Yeah. And growing up. And you were talking about pain, PMS, and cramps, bloating. What's normal and what is not? And I know that this is a question that might be like, well, it's very individual, but what could be something that maybe a girl that has no one at home to ask a question that can be a little bit of a guidance for her?
Sure. So, yeah, of course, it can be normal to have some bloating or some mood changes or some pain on your period. But what I would say is that if it's quite extreme for you, so, if you feel like you can't go to school because your mood's so severe, or you're bleeding so heavily, or your pain is so bad that you can't get out of bed, that's probably a sign that this is quite extreme, and it might be worth consulting a doctor, or um, we in the UK or in the West, you could call them naturopaths, people who deal with herbs and supplements and things like that, because it could just be that we, need a bit of lifestyle advice or some supplements around that time that can help. It doesn't necessarily mean you need medication, but of course, if you need to take some painkillers, maybe around the beginning of your period, that's okay. That's fine. You'll know. Sometimes I see people who are like, oh, I don't want to take any painkillers. And that's okay too, if you don't want to. So I think it's the individual choice. If you feel like you need to do these things to function and do all the things you want to do, then, take some painkillers. But, probably if you're a teenager, take your advice from your parents or a doctor. If you don't want to do that and you just want to sort of feel what's going on in your body, that's okay too. But I'd say that anything that's quite disruptive, you should probably seek some advice from someone.
And how much of our lifestyle and our daily habits is linked to our hormones? For example, I know that when I don't sleep properly, I will start experiencing changes in my life. So how related is it that, especially here in China, we have a very, very demanding school system. And so sometimes I know that students at that age, they don't sleep well. They don't eat properly. How can that impact our lifestyle to our hormonal imbalance?
Yeah, so these things definitely impact your hormonal balance. So, sleep, your nutrition, if you're doing any exercise. I'm not saying you've got to do extreme exercise, but just doing some exercise, moving the body can be really good for your hormone balance as well. Junk food, too much sugar, these can have a negative impact as well. And what we need to think about, just to, sort of put it into realistic terms, is that anything that puts stress on the body could have a negative impact on hormonal balance. So that could be, say, not sleeping. That's putting stress on the body. It's raising the hormone cortisol, which is then very inflammatory. And if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, that's going to make your pain feel worse. It's going to make your energy feel lower potentially. You could feel more stressed, more wound up by things. So if you're not exercising well, that can be a negative stress on the body. Or if you're over exercising, that could be doing the same thing. In terms of diet, if you're overeating, say junk food or processed foods, that's also putting a stress on the body. So we need to look at the two extremes and be somewhere in the middle. So, if you're really not sleeping at all, that's not good. If you're staying up really late, on screens, as we often are, that's also putting stress on the body. And I also think the other thing is, a lot of the time now we're quite isolated, on our computers and things like that. And definitely not having connection can put a stress on the body as well, not having people you can talk to and trust with these things. And I think that that's really important at this sort of puberty time, because you're having so many changes in your body, you're having changes emotionally, you're feeling different things. And it's really nice to have like what you're doing, so people can maybe reach out and speak to people at different stages who can guide them, because it's all new at puberty. I didn't know what was going on with my periods then, what was normal, what wasn't normal. But obviously now I know what's normal and what isn't normal. And you don't have to be a doctor to know what's normal. Just a woman, really, you could talk to and try and find out, does this sound normal? Is it okay? And even just the reassurance that it's probably going to pass and not be as bad as it is now as you get older can just sometimes be helpful.
And breaking the stigma around a topic that is so normal, talking about our hormones, our period
Yeah.
products, just such a normal conversation, right? And if I feel like this is for the teenagers that are going to be listening to this recording. If you do feel like you can share your experience with other partners, that will always help. Sharing experiences. What are you experiencing? Is that normal? Is this normal? That's so helpful. You were speaking about changes, physical changes, and I know that this topic it's like teenagers will be very much interested in hearing about acne and skin changes due to hormones. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, so, there is a big change in terms of for some girls, in terms of their skin and things around this. And this can often be due to the hormones maybe not being quite as balanced, or your body getting used to producing the hormones in this way. Um, so again, if it's quite extreme and troubling to you, maybe, consult a doctor and see what you can do about it from that perspective. But quite often, again, simple things can make a difference. So having a good skincare routine, and that doesn't have to be expensive, but just using good, clean products, washing your face in the morning and the evening, using topical agents as well. Even, salicylic acid is the most sort of basic thing you can use for like reducing spots, and that can help. But obviously, if you needed something stronger, consult the doctor. But also, diet plays a big part in your skin as well. So again, if you're having a lot of greasy, oily foods, a lot of processed foods, and for some people, there are just specific things, there are triggers for their skin. It could be dairy, it could be something in particular. So maybe cut that out for a short period of time and see if the skin improves. Other things with terms of supplements, zinc can be helpful for skin. Vitamin D can be useful for skin. Even things like echinacea, which is herbal, can be helping to reduce inflammation in the skin. So all these things could also play a part. So when I see somebody who comes to see me as a patient, they primarily come to see me for hormones, but I'd be trying to look at the whole picture. So, what's going on in your lifestyle, your stress, maybe you need some supplements. Maybe we need to bring in some meditation or mindfulness to try and reduce the stress a little bit. So I try to look at things from that perspective when I see someone. So that would be the advice I would give to the people listening to this also.
Yeah, our body's constantly trying to communicate what is the unit. It's not a battle against us, but it's more like I'm helping you to see what I need.
I'd also look at it from the spiritual perspective. You don't have to be religious at all, but like you're saying, what's my body trying to communicate with me means maybe sort of connection to other people, to nature, and really sort of connecting and going, what is this trying to tell me? If you're feeling a lot of strong emotions, what are these emotions trying to tell me? Where are they trying to redirect me? What should I be looking at maybe in my life? And, traditionally, a long time ago, we'd have had women's circles where the women of the tribes would gather of all different ages, babies to the elders, and there'd be open dialogue where you could talk about these things and not feel that level of shame. And, I feel like if you could potentially look at creating your own women's circle in that way. I mean, I think that's what online forums are really great for, because I think people don't feel the same shame maybe or stigma as talking face to face in a group. And maybe it's sometimes easier to connect with people online from that way. So I think that, really connecting with different people, getting different perspectives on what you're going through can be so helpful.
I love that. I love that. I do feel like it's so needed, and I personally I've been trying to reclaim that because I felt the need. My
Yeah.
body naturally was seeking for that. One last question for you. Speaking about all the changes and the transition, what is going to be the impact in the long term? So let's say right now, I don't really care about my hormones. I will not do anything about it. Am I going to have an impact in the long term? Or you were talking about menopause earlier, right? So tell us a little bit more about what's coming in the future so that teenagers can have like a vision of what's coming.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the things I'd wish that someone had told me, maybe when I was a teenager, is, I think just when you're a teenager, it's just really annoying having your period every month. It's disruptive. Maybe you can't do the things you would normally do around those few days or a week. And I think it's really important to understand what's going on in your body. So I knew that I was having a period, but I didn't know what that meant or anything. So I think it's really useful to know that, your estrogen levels are rising around the ovulation time. And then you should feel quite good energy and mood and get up and go. And that's a really good time of the cycle, in the middle of the cycle, to do lots of things, socialize, exercise, um, do all those sorts of things. But then it's equally normal after that in the second half of the cycle to have a drop in your hormones. And you might feel a bit more tired or a bit more sleepy, or your mood might not be as good. And that can be normal again. And of course, then you have the bleed, and maybe there would be some discomfort. And again, that can be normal. So I think it's all about looking at understanding that this is part of a normal process. But if it is being very disruptive and you can't do everything you want to do, you feel very unwell, then it's also good to seek some medical advice. And it doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be medicine from a doctor. It could be herbal supplements and things like that. So there's a supplement called Agnus castus. That's what we call it in the UK. It's also called chasteberry and Vitex in other countries. And this can be used in the second half of the cycle, and it can help to balance the estrogen and progesterone. So some women find that can be helpful for their PMS symptoms. In the same way that evening primrose oil could be useful, or things like starflower oil, which is a slightly stronger version of evening primrose. B vitamins are really important as well for balancing your hormones. So it could be worthwhile looking at taking a B supplement. Vitamin D is called a vitamin, but it's actually a hormone. That's really important as well for energy and mood. So there's lots of things you can look at yourself, as well as like we talked about diet and things like that. Now, as we then move from our teenage years, obviously we need to think about fertility. So if you don't want to get pregnant, it's important to look at things like contraception, or even look at things like natural cycles, because at certain points of our cycle around the ovulation, we're more fertile then than other points. So it's really important to sort of understand what's happening in the cycle. And it's never been easier, really, because there's so many apps available now where you can track your cycle, and in the way that it just wasn't when I was growing up. So the app would tell you, oh, you're ovulating now. This is your fertile time. And then you could be like, oh, how am I feeling? Do I feel good or bad when I'm around ovulation? So I think that that's really useful. And then it might be like, oh, you're in your premenstrual phase. And you'd be like, oh, maybe I don't feel as good the week before the period. Or maybe you do. If you start tracking it, you start understanding your patterns. And then when the time comes, if you want to try and get pregnant, you'll understand your cycle a lot better. You'll know if it's regular, irregular. You probably know from tracking when your ovulation is, which is the best time to get pregnant. So that can be really useful as well. And then obviously hormones change again after pregnancy, and then they start declining then maybe from your 40s on as you're running into the menopause. So I just think a really good sort of understanding of what your body's doing is important, because I always say to my patients, you've come to see me for some advice, but I'm just trying to help in the way I can, but you should be the expert on you, because you're with you all the time. So we've got 30 minutes together or 45 minutes together, but you're the one living with you. So you can tell me a good overview of how you feel sort of day to day, week to week, how you react to stress, what happens if you don't sleep, what happens when you don't eat well, or people drink a lot of alcohol. That can have a negative impact on their hormones, and smoking and things like that. So I always say, whatever you want to do it mindfully. Be mindful of these changes in your body. And I think that that's really important. And the sooner we can start as teenagers learning about our bodies and tracking our hormones. And I mean, I only really started doing it when I started doing this work. I was always aware of periods, but not in the same way I am now. But I think that's just such great advice to get really in tune with your body and how it responds to all different situations.
I treasure the knowledge that you are sharing with us today. It's empowering, it's simple, it's useful, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to share your wisdom with us. Is there any final piece of advice that you would like to share with our audience today?
Well, I think when you're a teenager, everything can feel very heightened and very difficult. And I guess maybe teenagers live more in the moment than we do now. But, it can always feel like things can be quite overwhelming. And what I would say is that things do change, things do improve. Situations can improve as you get older, and not to feel too disheartened if you're having a difficult time with your hormones at the moment, because it can be tricky at the beginning, and then things can also improve. And of course, the great thing is there's so much more out there now than there was, say, when I was a teenager. There are more experts specialized in hormones that you can seek out online. Like, say, if you can't go see someone or there's no one near to you, there are different books and resources on social media and things like that. So I think all those things can be really helpful if you want to seek out information to improve things as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roked, for your empowering words. And to our listeners, today we had such amazing information. I do hope that, as we suggested, you find help, you find resources, you get together in groups, share your journey, your experiences, ask questions, reach out to people. And there's definitely, I do love this last piece of advice. Things will pass. And this stage of your life, for all my teenage friends and people in the audience, will not come back. You will live it only once. It's going to be beautiful. It will create beautiful memories. And it will be very empowering for you in the future as well to go back and see all the things that you were able to achieve in these beautiful years. So with that, we wrap up another episode. I am very grateful for your company, and I hope that you will join us again next time as we explore more topics that touch the heart and enrich the mind. Until then, take good care of yourselves and of each other. I am thrilled to have you in my circle, and I am buzzing with excitement to conjure up some magic together. Remember, in Goddess Unleashed, we don't just talk the talk, we walk the mystical walk. Tune in and transform with me. Until next time, keep your spirits high and your magic untamed.